Hello, I hope this video finds you well. This is a Codingbat compare video where I'm going to compare the Python and Java solution to the same problem. So we're going to look at sum13, which is in list 2 for Python, and it's in array 2 for Java. And in this video, we're going to have a really nice opportunity to talk about why is this section called arrays in Java and this one called lists, and what is that fundamental difference. This video comes in response to a solution someone posted on my channel, and they asked me why it wasn't working. And so hopefully this will make it clear. Now, again, like I said, if you haven't done this problem, I do suggest you go and do it in advance because I'm not going to go through. I'm assuming you understand what this problem is. And also, this is quite a complex way to approach it. All right, with that, let's dive in. So I'm going to kind of explain with this person kind of their approach, and I'm not going to trace through all of this. You can find this on my GitHub repository. But essentially, the thinking was, I'm going to go through each element, and when it's the 13, I'm going to remove that element and the element next to it. So if we take this example list here, I'm going to say, are you 13? No. Okay, so I add it. Are you 13? No, so I add it. And that says, are you 13? And the answer here is yes. So what they do is they remove that. And then because this question states that it's the 13 and the following number, we also remove the 2. And what they forgot about was the fact that you can see this, is you see how these indexes have now changed? The length of this list has changed as well as the indexes for the values to the right of the values we removed. And this is a really big idea, and that's kind of where their problem was. Their first problem was that they were trying to do this by removing the elements, not realizing that the indexes were changing. So then it continues, are you 13? No. So we have 4 now, and it goes on, are you 13? Yes, and it removes it, and then we're done. And so we get a total of 4. And this is all traced right here. Now, this is a solution. The person that sent along their code, it wasn't quite right, but there's some really good thinking there, and I've cleaned it up. So they had a first check, if the length of nums is 0, return 0. And then I've done this with a while loop. And let me show you, this is another opportunity to talk about a really important difference between Python and Java. That is, in Python, a for loop, once you start your for loop, you can't change the actual Boolean expression. So you see here how we're checking the length of nums? It is going to assume the length of nums based on when you start the loop. So once you start removing elements, the length of nums the length of nums changes, but the for loop doesn't change. It's a really subtle point, and I'll show you how it works here, but not when we do a for loop. So we set a sum to 0, and we set an I to 0, and we set a while loop. We say while I is less than the length of nums. And then we say, all right, if nums.I is 13, we nums.remove nums.I. Now, this is another interesting point in the solution that was kind of posted along to me, was that they're removing the actual value, not at an index. So you see in the Java solution, when you use a remove function, you're removing the value at an index, or you have an option to do the index or the object, but in this case, we're selecting that actual nums value. Then we have to check to make sure, because remember, when we remove an element, the indexes have changed. So if this happens to be the last element in the list, if we try and remove it again, we're going to get an index at a bounds error. So what we do is we check that the length is less than, or I is less than the length. Then we remove that element, we exit the if statement, and then we check to make sure that I is valid and that it's not a 13, and we add it to sum. And then we increment our I. And if I hit that, it goes no problem. Now notice, if I take this, and I'm going to comment out this I, I'm going to comment out the while, I'm going to make this a for loop. And with a for loop, at the end of the for loop, we increment I by 1 at the end, so we don't need that. So in theory, this is exactly the same code, but if I hit go, it doesn't work. Get an index out of bounds error. And this is the big idea. Because Python will evaluate a single line and then execute it, when we reach this for loop for the first time in execution, all of the things get set up for it. So in this case, if we look at the tracing, when we start this, the length of the list is 6. But by the time we go through it, the length of the list is reduced down to 3. But this is always assuming that for this loop that we're going as long as I is less than 6. And that's why we run into that problem. Okay, let's look at the Java solution now. Now this is really interesting because I've said in a number of my videos that, this is a great resource, but they have the arrays section and they have the list section. And it gets a little confusing because, again, if we come back to the Python for a second, you'll see they refer to it as an array because they've cut and copied, the problems into the Python section. And that's not really right because lists and array are different things. So it turns out in Java, arrays don't have a remove function. You can't remove elements. Arrays are what are called static data structures, meaning their size are fixed at the time of creation. You can't remove elements. A list, on the other hand, is a dynamic data structure, meaning you can add and remove elements, so the size can change. And that is the fundamental difference between lists and arrays. So if we want to take that same approach with this Java solution, and again, this is needlessly complex, I really want to stress that point, we have to first convert our array into the Java equivalent of a list, which is an array list. So if we come down here and you take a look and it's set up, what do? I set up I check if the length is 0, return 0, I create this array list, and then I copy all the elements from nums into that array list. So everything after this point is going to be done using this array list. And in an array list, I can actually remove elements. So I set my sum, I set my I use this while loop. For an array list, you use the function size to check the size of it. That is exactly the same as length. And I have the exact same syntax here, with one minor exception. Is that here I say list.get I, so to get an element, I use the get function. And when I remove, the version of remove I use for an array list is I remove I, so I'm removing the value at index I, versus I'm removing, in Python, I'm removing the first instance of this number. There's a subtle but important difference here. Excuse me. Okay, so we go through all of this, and if I hit go, it works. And this is a really nice opportunity to highlight that difference between arrays and lists. Codingbat is one of my favorite resources out there for beginning programmers. But this is one of those things I talk a lot with my students about, is that even though the Java section is called arrays and the Python section is called lists, and we think about them as the same, they're not. Okay, last thing. This is the other fundamental difference between, or one of the differences between Python and Java. Notice I've written this with a while loop. So let's check if this is going to work with a for loop. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to bring this back in. I'm going to open a brace there, because I have the total wrong language. I want to say list.size. Actually, I have to write an actual Java loop, so let's do that. For int I equals 0, I is less than list.size, I is equal to I plus 1. I no longer need this. I no longer need this value here, so we're going to get rid of that. And I no longer need to increment at the end, because that's all taken care of with this for loop. If I hit go, it still works. This is a really important point. In Python, if I change this to a for loop, it doesn't work. In Java, it does. And that's because Java will actually go through and read the entire file before it runs the program. Therefore, with the size of the list changing inside of here, the loop will still manage that. So in the Python case, I said the list size in our example was 6. And by the time it's done, the list size is, I believe it's 4. Let's just take a look to be sure. The list size by the time we're done is 3, but the for loop is always going to assume it's 6. Java the list.size will change with our for loop in Java. So that was a lot there. I hope this helps. I really want to stress the point that this is, it's a great solution for understanding and practicing. It's not the best solution. It's actually overly complicated, and also it manipulates. Well, in the Java case, it's not a big deal because we actually copy the values in, but in the Python case, we want to be particularly careful because we are manipulating the nums parameter, which is a reference type. So you always want to be careful if you change the value of any list parameter, because those changes are permanent. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Have a wonderful day.